because it becomes an awesome blocker on the ground, and that segues nicely into our opponent, Peter Boo, who is playing actually Green Red Monsters.
Yeah, Peter Boo is playing a mostly stock build, but he's got Gorklan Rampager, which is the old-fashioned red-green approach, since he's not dabbling in black mana. The biggest twist he has our Destructive Revelry main deck, which is going to be reasonable here. It doesn't have a ton of targets, but at least it can hit Boon Satyr and potentially a Banisher, an Unflinching Courage after sideboard if he keeps it in. But he also has multiple Xenagoses. He's got the Reveler and the God of Revels, so that he's got a little bit of diversity in his threats. And he's kicking it with the old-fashioned clear sleeves.
This is a throwback, is Peter Bowie, the first player on the table with anything, a second turn Elvish Mystic, and Voice of Resurgence, the play from Drew Snell.
Both players opening up pretty reasonably. Obviously Drew would much prefer to have a 1-drop on 1, but the mana in green-white is not that great. Wow, turn 3 Palakranos. This is pretty big. If Drew doesn't have a Celestia Charm, he's going to be operating from a disadvantage all game.
Yeah. The green-white aggro deck a little bit faster to the board generally than green-red monsters, but green-red definitely pound for pound playing the better cards.
Yeah, and the Elvish Mystics out of the red-green deck are just so good in this matchup. Some green-white decks play Elvish Mystic, not this one. This one's much more focused on the 2 and 3 drops with a lot of interactive cards. Its only 1-drop is Soldier of the Pantheon, which was a little late to the party, unfortunately.
So Loxodon Spire, the play from Drew last turn, swept up by Domri Red, fighting through Palakranos.
And Domri is just devastating. That Domri is one of the 2 power cards in this matchup. Mizzy Mortar, so often the sweeper effect is just incredible, or as an early tempo play. But then Domri, if you ever get anything going on board, Domri can just rip them apart, and they don't actually have a ton of ways to get at it if they ever fall behind.
Yeah, it's really incumbent on the green-white deck to get out on the front foot and keep leveraging that early tempo. When the game is being played at this pace, it's quite favorable for green-red monsters.
Yeah, now, this has historically been a matchup that favors green-red a little, but it's very close because the green-white deck can actually present some pretty aggressive openings, and if their cards line up right, they have some blowout combat tricks, blowout ways to save mana, whether it's God's Willing to, for 1 mana, stop something, or a Banisher Priest to exile something with tempo, or a Celestia Charm.
So Drew adds a couple more little knuckleheads to the board, the Soldier of Pantheon and a Fleece Mane Lion. Peter Bowie takes up his Domri, fails to reveal anything.
Now, what do you think about the Celestial Flares main deck in the green-white deck? It's an additional possible way to interact with fatties, but it's a little bit clumsy in situations like this.
Yeah, there's definitely spots, Palakranos is a card that the green-white deck cares about. Blood Baron is challenging to answer. There's a couple spots where it's going to be very good, but again, it's sort of predicated on Drew getting out on the front foot to begin with, and he hasn't been able to establish any sort of traction in the game thus far.
Yeah, there's not really a ton he can do until he deals with Palakranos. Potentially Ajani can send somebody to the air to at least take Domri down, but how does this change, though, when Drew activates Fleece Mane Lion next turn?
It gives him a lot more time, gives him a lot more breathing space. Of course, he's still soft to a potential Stormbreath Dragon out of the green-red deck, but...
is there any chance Peter just blows the Domri right now to kill the Fleece Mane Lion?
I feel like it's unlikely because he has such an enormous resource advantage right now. So 5 mana from Bowie, and
there's
he plays
that dragon.
Stormbreath Dragon. Stormbreath, a very challenging card for green-white aggro. Basically necessitates them being ahead on the table already, as Celestia Charm and Banisher Priest, none of these cards provide any defense.
Stormbreath Dragon, side by side with Palakranos, a pretty classic combo in this new standard era. Yeah. The heaviest heavy hitter of each of the 2 colors.
So Drew with Boon Satyr in hand does not deploy it at the end of the turn. And another Soldier of the Pantheon off the top for Drew, no help. And his hand is just not equipped to fight this kind of fight.
It's interesting that Stormbreath Dragon immediately replace Thundermaw Hellkite, like just one after the other. Their play pattern hasn't proven to be too different. Obviously, Thundermaw Hellkite has the tactical ability to tap down blockers and kill small flyers, as well as hitting a little harder. Stormbreath Dragon, though, the pro-white is quite a bit more important than the Stormseeker ability, right? Like than the extra damage.
Oh, absolutely. As you see, Soldier of the Pantheon added, and now Drew is sending his everything into the red zone. Yeah, otherwise you would see, I think, a lot more. I think War Leader's Helix would definitely be a card that people would play way more copies of overall in Standard if it could actually kill Stormbreath Dragon.
So what do you think? What do you think is the plan here? You attack with all three. The level 1 block is to have the Elvish Mystic block the Soldier of the Pantheon, the Palakranos eat the Fleecemane Lion, and the Voice knock, get in for 2. But what's the trick? What's the gimmick? What's he up to?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, there's the most commonly played pump spell here in these decks is Selesnya Charm, and that would have just killed Palakranos before combat, presumably, if that was an option that Drew had. So I think that if everything went after Domri there, Peter is just saying, all right, that's fine. I don't want to fight over this.
Wow.
Domri down.
Maybe that was actually just like a great psychological move. He didn't even lose a single creature because Peter's like, okay, I just don't want to lose to some kind of a giant growth effect,
But Peter's still in a commanding position here. Palakranos and Stormbreath Dragon, along with a boatload of mana.
And this is a real hard spot. Peter's just trying to make sure. I mean, he's at 20 life with multiple cards that it seems like Drew can't beat. This is one of those rich person problem type of situations. You got to make sure that that you're still playing tight, you're still playing smart, you're not taking anything for granted.
So it looks like we're going to Monstrosity Palakranos here, targeting the 2 copies of Soldier of the Pantheon. That goes down with no contest, and now the 7/7 Palakranos and Stormbreath Dragon come roaring across.
This is going to knock Drew to 3 if he doesn't have anything. Celestial Flare, not really an option given he only has 1 white mana.
He does have Boon Satyr in his hand.
Ah, so he could chump. Seems reasonable. Although This is a real tough spot for green-white, no question.
So it looks like Boon Satyr deployed, blocks.
Now it's funny, the Boon Satyr, this is actually a brilliant play. The Boon Satyr is going to kill the Palakranos because it has 4 damage on it from the Soldier.
Yeah, Palakranos does not just get to deal damage, it's a fight, so there's 4 damage on there from the soldiers. And
great play by Drew.
Drew comes crashing across with his Voice of Resurgence and his Fleecemane Lion. No blocks from Peter, and then Drew adds Loxodon Smiter to his side of the table.
Now the problem is, Drew is still looking at a very, very short clock here. I mean, Stormbreath Dragon could potentially go monstrous this turn and put Drew at 2 life. But Peter very likely is going to want to advance his board any other way he can.
And he plays a second copy of Stormbreath Dragon. This is an attack for 8 and does leave Peter with 2 chump blockers on defense, if nothing else. So,
yeah, and 15 life to work with. So this is a real good spot. I don't think Drew has any outs.
Not with him at this high of a life total. There is the Ajani flying in double strike, my largest creature, but that's not enough damage from here. And that's going to be game 1 to Peter.
Wow, well played by both. All right, what are we looking at in the sideboard out of Drew and his green-white deck? What's he going to do to try to turn the tide?
Well, the most critical card that he has access to is 3 copies of Banisher Priest. It's just a very good answer to Palakranos and other troublesome large threats. He also has 2 copies of Unflinching Courage. This is a card that's receded in value a little bit because of the prevalence of Jund monsters having access to ultimate prices and dread boars instead of damage-based removal. But here against Peter's build, with no black as far as Drew knows, it could be very powerful here as well. He has 2 Unraveling Aether, 3 copies of Plummet if he wants a narrow but powerful answer to Stormbreath Dragon, and extra Root Board defenses. I've seen green-white aggro players go to this card as having an additional answer to an overloaded Mizium Mortars, an additional Celestial Flare as well, which again, given Drew's vulnerability to Stormbreath Dragon, we might see come in the additional copy here.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really one of those questions of familiarity with his deck. Is this, I mean, this is obviously a matchup he's tested quite a bit. Is this the type of matchup where you want to have a bunch of reactive cards like Rootborn Defenses against Mizzy Mortars? It might be. He would have some experience with that, or it's possibly just wants to be as low to the ground as possible, hit hard, and not gum up his deck with too many reactive cards.
Yeah, and
I don't know.
Yeah, this is another kind of interesting case study in the way this deck has constructed. And once you actually have Rootborn Defenses somewhere near your 75, and Drew actually has one in his main deck alongside with one in the sideboard, it's really hard for me to really want to play Fleecemane Lion over Call of the Conclave. Before, if you're not going down the populate road, I feel like Fleecemane Lion's Monstrous is enough upside to get around the fact that, Soldier of the Pantheon is a problem for it and so forth. But once you have populate effects, I really like having Call of the Conclave in that slot, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely strengths and weaknesses to both. And
ultimate price is another consideration that maybe you want to move towards Fleecemane Lion. So there's a lot of variables, but
definitely. Now on Peter Bowie's side, he's got some fatties if all he really wants is to go that route. Like Arbor Colossus isn't particularly insane or anything, but if he just wants a big hard body, Arbor Colossus is an option. Beyond that, I mean, do you think it's possible that he thinks that Unravel the Aether is like a thing because of Unflinching Courage and Boonsatyr?
It's possible. It's very narrow, but
it's very narrow.
Not out of the realm of possibility.
Could he possibly want Chandra Pyromaster?
I think Chandra is a really difficult card to play. I think, given that the green-red monsters list is not a burn deck, it's not interested in going ultimate. It has to be against decks where you just want the 0 power. You just need the source of card advantage. If Peter is losing, it's because he's on the back foot. It's hard for me to imagine Chandra being very powerful in a game that he wasn't already winning, being able to leverage his advantage and going on the front foot. It just doesn't kill very much in Drew's deck. We're looking at basically Soldier of the Pantheon and nothing else. And so I don't think Chandra's really for these kind of matchups.
Yeah, my guess would be that the most likely scenarios we see that one Destructive Revelry come out and maybe one Arbor Colossus go in. It's possible he doesn't change a single card. I mean, I think this is one matchup where it is very, very possible to think that Bowie has nothing more than what is in his main deck.
Yeah, his 60 that he's already shuffling in game 1 might be his best 60.
Yep.
So are you a really big fan of Plummet here on Drew's side? Do you think Stormbreath Dragon is that big of an issue?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say I'm a big fan. I think that depending on, first of all, the most important thing is what has his testing shown him is the way, what are the games that you actually win against Red Green? The Banisher Priest is first and foremost top priority. That is number one most important thing going on. My guess would be that something proactive like Unflinching Courage is much more appealing as a way to fight Stormbreath Dragon, where you can actually just race it, But that said, I don't know which of these tricks in the sideboard are the ones you really want. My guess would be you don't use Plummet, but I don't know for sure. I could imagine one Plummet, playing exactly one Plummet being kind of a hot little twist that he wouldn't expect.
Yeah. So both players keep 7. Drew leads off with a Temple Garden and a turn 1 Elvish Mystic Alpha Forest for Peter. And Fleecemane Lion, the play on the second turn for Drew.
Now what's interesting is the red-green deck, without having access to all the black removal like the Jund versions have, he is a lot more vulnerable to a Unflinching Courage. If an Unflinching Courage were to come down on this Fleecemane Lion right now, that would just be, that's a pretty aggressive little situation for turn 3, particularly if it lives for 2 more turns and in monstrosities.
Yeah, absolutely. And Drew with a pretty reasonable hand here, made his 3rd land drop, and doesn't attack, just passes the turn back. Had Ajani in hand, elects not to deploy.
Interesting. So he's playing a controlling game against the red-green player here. What do you think is the plan?
I don't know, but Ajani plus an attack seemed like a pretty high upside play last turn. Make your Fleecemane Lion big enough to attack through the Courser. Puts a lot of pressure on Peter to find an answer before that thing goes monstrous.
Right. That's what I'm thinking is, what are you doing if you're running no attacks, no blocks, no Ajani?
Probably an end of turn Boonsatyr is in the works here. We'll find out in a moment. Peter plays Polychronos.
And we do see the Boonsatyr.
Heaven of the Worm, the draw for Drew.
Doesn't look like he has a 4th mana, though. Which is going to put him a little bit behind right now. And we do see he did decide to Plummet. chips the turn again with no Ajani.
And Arbor Colossus off on the top now revealed for Peter, so he brought that in as well. Arbor Colossus is interesting in this matchup because it's both a big lumbering body, also closes out the Ajani flying in double strike out in certain cases as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, the Arbor Colossus is really two different types of things. One, it's a 6/6 hard body for 5, but two, it's an answer to flyers, whether it's Night Veil Spectre, Desecration Demon. I mean, there's all sorts of things that Arbor Colossus does tactically.
So Peter Bowie there goes monstrous with the Palakranos, takes down the Boon Satyr, which is uncontested from Drew there. Drew deploys another Boon Satyr at the end of Peter's turn.
Problem here is that Drew is just starting to fall further and further behind. He desperately needs an answer to Palakranos. Palakranos is just devastating in this matchup.
And Peter with more heavy hitters to come too.
Absolutely. Now he does have Plummet, so he can deal with the Stormbreath Dragon if and when it eventually comes. But he isn't making any progress. And quite honestly, the longer the game goes, the better it is for Red Green.
And now here's a devastating overloaded Mizium Mortars for Peter.
Because of things like this.
Palakranos and Corsair come across for 9 points of damage.
So at least Drew has his Advent mana, but what does he need to do in order to get back into this?
Well, the problem is that he needs so many Selesnya Charm type effects, and now Scavenging Ooze, a lingering threat as well, to be able to answer all these large creatures.
Wow, and there's another Palakranos coming. Well, an impressive showing from Peter Bowie and his red-green monster deck. Certainly not over yet, but this is looking real tough for Drew Snell.
Peter willing to risk the advent of the worm here. Gets in with his Corsair as well. And Drew making it worm before blocks.
Now the key here is Peter has an advantage on every axis, every metric. He's got far more mana, far more life, a far more dominating board, and he's got more threats in his hand and on top of his deck. One of the easy mistakes that people make sometimes when they're winning is to not figure out how to avoid the spots where they could actually lose. They go through normal lines of play instead of just, instead of maximizing their chances of avoiding that loss.
Yeah, and we're in a spot right now where it's possible Unflinching Courage is still a card that matters. Is another thing to keep in mind.
Oh yeah.
So like you said, always good to be conscious when you're winning by a lot, to make sure that no backdoor way emerges for your opponent to win.
All right, so that's the game. Peter Bowie takes it 2-0 versus Drew Snell. Green-Red Monsters with yet another victim.
Yeah.
We've been seeing a lot all day today of the big four beating up on the challengers.
Right. Although we did have the win on camera by Red White Burn earlier. We don't know what the status of that player is, but at least 3-0 at the time. I feel in that second game there,